Hi, my name is Danae. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to sandwich and baste your quilt. Sandwiching and basting a fold and sew quilt is just like sandwiching and basting any other quilt. So if you have a technique that you prefer, you can proceed with that method. Before we begin sandwiching our quilt, let's go over some quilting terms.
Batting is the fluffy material used between the quilt top and back. It's typically made of cotton, polyester, wool, bamboo, or a combination of these. A quilt sandwich is the 3 layers of the quilt stacked together. This includes the quilt top, the batting in the middle, and then the quilt back. Basting is the method of holding the layers of the quilt sandwich together temporarily. Basting can be accomplished with a needle and thread, with your basting stitches, safety pins, or a basting spray. Basting stitches or pins are then removed once the quilt is fully quilted. Quilting is the process of permanently stitching together the 3 quilt layers, back, batting, and top. A long arm quilting machine is a sewing machine that's attached to a long arm so that the quilter can move the machine freely over the quilt. Long arm quilting machines are ideal for machine quilting large quilts. Machine quilting is quilting the 3 quilt sandwich layers together with a standard sewing machine. Hand quilting is quilting the 3 quilt sandwich layers together by hand with a needle and thread.
Before you begin the process of sandwiching your quilt, you need to determine how you want your quilt quilted. If you're hiring your quilting out to a long arm quilter, you do not need to sandwich your quilt, as it is part of the process of loading the long arm quilting machine. If you are hiring out your quilting, you can skip this video altogether. If you are going to quilt your quilt yourself, stick around because we're going to use the William quilt as our example for how to sandwich a quilt. Read the instructions on your quilt batting packaging before you begin sandwiching your quilt. Lay your batting out on a hard flat surface. I like to use a table or a kitchen island, but I have been known to sandwich my quilt on the floor before.
Smooth out the wrinkles by running your hand over the batting. Your batting will not be completely smooth like your fabric, but you should be able to remove any wrinkles that would show or be felt through the quilt. If you have any difficult wrinkles, spray just a little bit of water on the troubled area and pat it down. Be sure your batting is completely dry before you add any other layers to your quilt sandwich. Once you feel you've removed any of the major wrinkles in your batting, lay your quilt back on top of your batting. Smooth all of your wrinkles out of your quilt back by running your hand over your batting and quilt back layers repeatedly until all of the wrinkles are removed. Carefully flip your quilt back and batting over. Be sure that you don't wrinkle any of the batting or fabric as you do so. Smooth out any remaining wrinkles in your batting. Lay your quilt top on top of your quilt sandwich. As you stack your quilt top and back on top of each other, check to make sure that your prints are facing the same direction. Just as you did with the back of your quilt, smooth the quilt top out by hand. Now you have created your quilt sandwich. Center your quilt top so that your quilt back and batting extend 2 to 4 inches past the quilt top on each side. If you are basting your quilt on a surface that you don't want scratched, you can place a cutting mat beneath your quilt to protect the surface. In this tutorial, we'll begin by basting with safety pins first. Later on, I will briefly go over basting with a needle and thread. Safety pin your quilt sandwich layers. Begin safety pinning in the middle of your quilt and work your way out. Be sure that your pins go through all 3 layers. When basting your quilt, you should place your pins about 4 inches apart, which is close enough so that no matter where you place your hand on your quilt, you are touching at least 1 safety pin. This will ensure that your quilt layers will not shift around as you quilt your quilt. Continue to pin the rest of your quilt sandwich together until it is finished. If you are machine quilting your quilt, I recommend using a needle and thread as the pins can get caught in your sewing machine easily. Use a contrasting color of thread and a sharp number 3, 4, or 5 needle. Measure out your thread to half the width of your quilt. Thread your needle and tie a large knot at the end of your thread. Begin in the middle of your quilt and stitch a long running stitch to the edge of your quilt. To make a running stitch, simply rock the needle up and down. Be sure to go through all 3 layers of your quilt sandwich. Make a large knot when you've reached the end of your quilt. Thread your needle again and tie a large knot. Beginning in the middle at the same point, stitch a long running stitch in the opposite direction. When you've reached the end, tie a knot again. Just as with the safety pin basting method, your basting stitches should be no more than 4 inches apart. Your hand should touch a basting stitch anywhere you put it on the quilt. Once your quilt sandwich has been fully basted, you can begin quilting.
Thank you for watching this tutorial on how to sandwich and baste your quilt. For more tutorials, visit foldandsew.com.